Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome into Green Dot Daily live from the Tommy John studio in New York City. I am your host, Charlie DiSturco, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. 6 weeks ago, the Detroit Tigers had a 0.1% chance of making the playoffs. They're now in that final wildcard spot with 6 games left to play. Can they continue to soar up the MLB standings? Sean Zerillo hops on to break down both the AL and the NL wildcard races, which are far from over. Meanwhile, in the WNBA, the playoffs are officially underway. So we've got Marino in studio bringing you the 411 on what to know ahead of tonight's games, along with a couple of best bets. But we start over in the land of the NFL, where last night the Buffalo Bills became the 5th team this season to start a perfect 3-0 after an absolute drubbing of the Jaguars. Buffalo joins the Chiefs, Seahawks, Steelers, and Vikings as the undefeateds to date. Since the 1970 merger, for what it's worth, just over 3/4 of those teams that start 3-0 end up going on to make the playoffs. But since the postseason expansion back in 2020 to 21, 14 of 17 that began a perfect 3-0 would go on to make the playoffs, so about a little over 80%. History suggests that at least one of these aforementioned 5 teams should fail in their postseason ventures, and who better to bring and break it down than Chad Millman and Simon Hunter of the Favorites podcast as they join me now. Again, the 5 teams that remain undefeated: the Bills, Chiefs, Seahawks, Steelers, and Vikings. Guys, I'll kick it to you first, Simon. It feels like Kansas City, Buffalo, barring, unforeseen injuries, they're pretty much safe on their ventures to making the postseason. But the 3, Seattle, Steelers, Vikings, maybe a little bit unexpected of a hot start. Simon, which team do you think might be a perfect opportunity to fade to miss the postseason?
Yeah, you nailed it. You can bet if you want on there to be an injury for those really good teams, but we're not going to play that route, right? We're going to lean into what the schedules are and how tough each division is. So right off the top, the Vikings, me and Chad talked about this team a lot this offseason. We got a lot wrong on them, but the one thing we did get right is this division has some really good coaching. And as good as their head coaching has been and their defensive coaching has been, the same could be said for Detroit and for Green Bay, right? Those are 2 really tough teams in their division, and they have yet to play a divisional game, which to me is a big deal. So looking at these matchups, there's a couple ways you can go with it. But, the plus 120, plus 160, there's a couple different numbers out there. I'm going to definitely take the high number of plus 160 from them to miss the playoffs rather than them making it. And it's honestly just about the way their schedule goes from here on out. And we already have health questions about Sam Darnold. As great as he's been, how many shots can he take, right? He is a guy who likes to hang in the pocket and take these big hits. It's only going to get tougher from here on out for this team. So that's definitely something that jumped out right away when I saw this number.
Yeah, it feels like with Minnesota, you can honestly maybe bet to miss the playoffs. They got at Green Bay, the Jets in London, Detroit, at the Rams. Maybe after those 4, say they go on 0-4, and you're like, well, now they're plus money to make the playoffs. You could get a little plus money on each side of things. It's kind of a game-by-game perspective. You have to look down the line as far as scheduling goes. Chad, how do you feel in general? Are you on board with Minnesota, or do you think maybe Pittsburgh or Seattle's a bit more fraudulent?
I like the opportunistic way you're thinking about it, Charlie. Maybe you fade the Vikings now and then buy in after this tough stretch. I'm with Simon, though. The Vikings have a hard road to get to the playoffs in a conference that feels like there's going to be a lot of teams that have a shot to get in, including 2 other teams in their division. It's interesting to me that we're not leaning in on the Steelers, who are 3-0, and before the season were a professional bettor favorite to go under their season win total, and for Mike Tomlin to have his first non-500 or better season in his career with the Steelers. And the Steelers have a very hard schedule in the latter half of the year, a brutal schedule. It's why a lot of people were looking at this team to finish below 500 this year. But what's interesting is the divisional comps, right? You got the Ravens, who are 1-2, the Bengals, who are 0-3. Those are the teams that everyone thought would be leading that division. You got the Browns, who not only is Deshaun Watson seemingly washed, but their offensive line is a wreck. Myles Garrett is now admitting he's going to play on bad feet for the rest of the season. Like, their advantage in the division is greater than I think the Vikings' advantage in their division, which is why I agree with Simon when it comes down to those two teams, which are probably the most obvious of the two.
Right. And Simon, I just want to quickly ask about Pittsburgh, because I mentioned Minnesota and I mentioned the opportunity to fade them early here. And then Chad kind of hinted at Pittsburgh's schedule kind of getting difficult. And Brandon Anderson, one of our colleagues, has the breakdown at Action Network of every 3-0 team, how to maybe present an attack. Week 10 through 18 for Pittsburgh is absolutely incredible. Browns, Bengals, Steelers, or Ravens, that is, they have to play all three of those teams twice. They have at Washington, they have at Philly, they play KC in week 17. It feels like if you're going to fade this Pittsburgh team, it comes later in the season. Am I correct by that, Simon?
Yeah, that's my whole view of it, Charlie. And it's also, they're unlucky where they don't get to play the Browns right now, right? We think by then the Browns' offensive line will be healthier. And they probably will have made a switch at that QB position. Same goes for this Bengals team, right? They have a young defense, and you can just tell this Bengals defense is not right yet, right? It's going to take a while to get these young kids up to speed. So they're in a tough spot where it's going to get brutal. And me and Chad talked earlier in the year, this is where they needed to win, right? They needed to start off really well, this Pittsburgh team. But it's very telling the books are only having at plus 110 for them to miss the playoffs, right? Normally this would probably be plus 150, plus 170, especially with all the respect we give to Tomlin and this is how tough this division is. But they know that it's only going to get really worse from here on out. And there's still questions at the QB position. I know Justin Fields played really well here early on, but they haven't really asked him to do much, right? They have not really trailed in any game. So it's all been favorable for Pittsburgh here early on. And I think things start to change as we get longer into the season.
Yeah, it's a gauntlet after week 10, and we just saw Jaden Daniels star last night. So, maybe Washington is a difficult matchup for them as well. And then you look at Seattle, obviously, the question is, are they for real? I guess only time will tell on that front. Win against Bo Nix, a win against the New England Patriots, and then they go out and they beat up on a Pee Wee football team and the Miami Dolphins starting, backup quarterbacks. It feels like that's the equivalent of having Derrick Henry run against high schoolers. He's going to run for 200 yards easily. But it's not a Tuesday without you guys having the opportunity to vent a little bit. And I hear that one of you in particular is on tilt.
Loser.
So Chad Millman, the floor is yours, my friend. What is getting you upset from last week?
Charlie, I think we all know. At the end of the day, football is about two things. It's about power and it's about violence. And I feel like one team has mastered this in the short yardage situation, and even they aren't getting it right 100% of the time. I'm talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm talking about an epidemic in the NFL of coaches getting way too cute in fourth and short yardage situations, especially near the goal line. I'm going to give you 3 examples that really get my goat from the past couple of weeks. Whether they've cost me bets or not doesn't really matter. They may stick out in my head because of that. But the truth is, on one of these, I'm talking about the Denver Broncos, 4th and goal against the Bucs this past weekend. I was on the Broncos. I won this game. But the Broncos had 4th and goal, and instead of just going right up the gut, saying our big uglies are stronger than your big uglies, we're going to get leverage, we're going to get low, we're going to win the battle at the line of scrimmage, they pitch it out. Their guy barely gets to the edge and only scores because another guy on the other side of the line slips and he can't get to him. The Broncos score a touchdown. How about the Falcons? In their game against the Chiefs, they're down 22-17. Some of us may or may not have had the Falcons plus 3.5. They get multiple chances at the 5-yard line to score a touchdown. What do? Instead of running it up the gut, instead of taking their offensive line, which had been troubled that entire game, and saying, this is your chance to prove it. This is your chance to be powerful. This is your chance to be a football player. They take Bijan Robinson to the edge. He loses yardage. They lose the game. Or how about our favorite tush-push team, the Philadelphia Eagles? We know what I'm talking about. They had a chance to end that game against the Falcons a couple weeks ago. Instead of taking Saquon Barkley, who had been running through the Falcons, and giving him a chance to get 3 yards and end the game, they try to throw it to his iron hands. He drops the ball. they lose the game. Jim Harbaugh is so good at turning teams around because he recognizes the most basic principle of football is you want to beat the crap out of people. And he gets his players to believe in that. That's why his teams turn it around quickly, because he plays physical, violent football. I want teams to get back to that every single time in short yardage situations. No more cutesy.
Chad, I feel like this is like I expect a little bit better from you. I would say like this is a boomer take. I think like I understand you want to run the football, but you don't have the luxury of having Josh Allen to run the ball. You know, he's a battering ram. When you don't have that, you don't have, you know, like Trevor Lawrence, who's 6'6", the QB sneaking. I get the whole pitching thing, but like, why are we not thinking about the Mahomes play action rollout where he rolls out, a tight end rolls out, and they basically...
Yeah, there's one team that can do that. I was going to mention the exception to the rule. If you have Patrick Mahomes, who's smart enough to be and accurate enough to get it to the right guy. But even, by the way, in that game, non-boomer, whatever they call people of your generation, Charlie, in that game, when the Chiefs needed to beat the Falcons, Andy Reid gave the ball to Carson Steele, and they ran it up the middle of that defensive line of the Falcons. That's how they ended up winning that game. So they could have Patrick Mahomes bleed to the edge and throw short passes on short yardage situations. Don't tell me my business, son.
How do you put 10 guys in the middle of the field and then you're like, yeah, no, run it up 10 guys rather than having a play action? Or Jaden Daniels last night, how many fourth downs did they go for? They run a play action on 4th and short, 3rd and short, and goal situations, or an RPO, and like not every team is blessed with an athletic quarterback like that, but when you have that opportunity, why would you just hand it off to Brian Robinson and saying, yo, run a yard? Why would you not give the ball to your playmaker and make
I'll
him
tell
do
you
something?
why, and maybe they don't teach this new math to you, Charlie. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. It's football. Beat the other person up, get the inch, win the game. I'm not having this fight with you. That's the way it works.
Simon, I'm going to ask you your thoughts because, quite frankly, you take a 2-3 step drop back and the ball off. You're starting, a few yards behind, not QB sneaking it forward like most teams should do on 4th. How do you feel about this short down situations? Do you not mind the creativity that is coming from the offensive minds?
I would say off the top, Chad is Gen X. Please don't call him a boomer. He deserves more respect.
Gen X.
Yeah, that's the generation we actually like.
It's the forgotten generation.
I would say I'm a mixed bag because I love a good fullback dive. I feel like that's what Chad's kind of talking about here. He just wants the biggest man to get the ball, run it up the middle, and just hit the guy in front of him and win that one-on-one battle right in the hole. But I think it's a little bit of mix about what you guys are talking about. Both. There's all different ways to do it. I think Chad's leaning too much into that run up the middle though, because I think Charlie's kind of talking about it. Like these teams, they want to dare you to do that, right? That's why they put so many guys in the middle, because I think what we're talking about here is just speed on the outside, right? That's the killer. If your speed on defense beats the offensive speed on the outside, you look like an idiot. And that Atlanta play was brutal. Like that was dead from the get-go. So I get where both sides are coming from, but I do lean towards more mysteriously throwing the guys off, not just run up the middle, kind of have people on the move. So I'm going to go with Charlie's side, as painful it is to say.
I feel like whatever generation you guys are, you're just piling up on me, and it's just wrong. And you know what? As you get older, in the long run, you're going to realize that you're on the wrong side of history.
Listen, Chad, I'm a sucker for an FB dive in Madden on 4th and short because they don't see it coming. But when there's 10 guys in front of the line of scrimmage, I like to do a little play action rollout with my quarterback or an RPO if I have someone like a Lamar or a Jaden Daniels. But we can table that discussion for another day. I understand where you're coming from.
It's a game of violence.
The pitches are annoying. I'll say that. I agree with you. These pitches are not fooling absolutely anybody. But we have to move on. We're just going to go right back to you, Chad. This weekend, the Bears are playing. This isn't, I would say, boomer homer. It's kind of all the MERs here. Bears favored by 3, 2.5, 3. You like them to take down the Rams, who surprised San Francisco last week.
Yeah, to me, this is it's a buy low, sell high spot, right? And the Rams going against the Niners, they were huge underdogs. They had a 5% chance to win that game with 4 minutes and 57 seconds left. And from that time, everything they needed to go right went right for them to win that game. There were multiple penalties on one play against the Niners. They had a 38-yard punt return. The Niners missed a field goal because they couldn't advance the ball any further into the Rams side of the field. Everything they needed to go right went right. The Bears, meanwhile, everything that could go wrong went wrong for them against the Colts, and they were still only down 7-3 with 25 seconds left in the third quarter before the Colts scored a touchdown, and they were down 14-9 with 5 minutes left in the game. They were atrocious in this game, but now they're going up against a Rams team that basically won their Super Bowl against the Niners and had all the luck they needed, and the Bears had none of the luck that they needed. Huge regression for me. This game opened at 1. It's moved to 2.5. I grabbed it at 2.5. Simon and I talked about the Bears at 1 on Sunday night on the favorites, so I'm still leaning Bears if I can get them for less than the field goal.
Right. And a reminder to watch Simon and Chad on the favorites on Sunday, right after the games before Sunday Night Football. And then, of course, throughout the week, they also have more shows where they give out all their best bets for this week. Simon, you are targeting the Colts, who obviously took down the Bears this past week. We talked about the Steelers. We talked about their sparkling 3-0 start. And you think this is a good spot to fade Justin Fields and Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think this is the perfect spot to fade this team. And the main reason is this is a nice matchup for this Colts offense. The Colts want to be a bruising team. They're the team that Chad wants the rest of the NFL to be, right? They're a bunch of just big bruisers up front, offensive line-wise. Graded as the second best offensive line right now in football. And Jonathan Taylor is, arguably a top 3, top 4 running back. And you kind of saw that last week when they give him the touches. He can produce some pretty magical stuff with that against a team that's not a good against the run. And it's just like the Bears last week. The Bears, they're really good against the pass. Even they have great pass rushers as well, which is an underrated quality to that Bears team. Same goes for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh needs team to pass the ball to beat these teams. So, week 1, they got a nice break playing against Atlanta. Kirk Cousins was not sure of himself at that point. That offense just looked out of sorts. The next week, what do? They catch a Broncos team that just looked inept, but they got dominated in the second half. I mean, me and Chad bet that Broncos team. I still can't believe we didn't cover that one. But the Broncos really dominated this Pittsburgh team in the second half. They just struggled once they got down to the red zone. And then last week, Herbert's winning that game. Once he gets banged up, the game was kind of over, right? They eventually became one-dimensional. They put Tyler Heineke in there, and they were just like, okay, we just got to keep passing the ball, try to catch up, and it never got there. This, to me, just seems like a nice spot for this Colts team. The ball control of this game against a Pittsburgh team that they're a little overrated right now, right? Me and Chad, we historically like to fade Pittsburgh, especially on the road as a favorite. Mm-hmm. Now you're looking at a matchup here where about, early money, it's 80% of the money right now is on Pittsburgh. 75% of the tickets is on Pittsburgh. It's going to be a nice home dog spot for this Colts team. So I'm going to grab the key number at +2 right now, just in case it does go back down.
Yeah, this really feels like a great buy spot on Indianapolis. Not a rah-rah Mike Tomlin spot that we always
No.
love to bet at home as an underdog. And Chad, I'm just hoping it's 4th down. The Bears need a conversion. And instead of handing the ball off to 1.5 yard per carry DeAndre Swift, Caleb Williams rolls out, dime to Rome Odunze, touchdown, they cover. And then you can come on Tuesday and tell me that me and Simon were more correct. But Chad Millman, Simon.
No. What I'll do is come on Tuesday and say, how much of a genius am I that I had the Bears -2.5?
There you go.
And anything I said about doing fullback dives on short yardage, I'll find another example where I'm right, Charlie. There's 16 freaking games coming up. I'll be right in one of them.
Don't worry. I have the producers in the back here that can easily pull up the footage. I'll make them rewind it so that we can watch last week's episode just to show them that maybe you don't always run it up the gut. But Chad Millman, Simon Hunter, appreciate you guys hopping on, and we'll talk to you next Tuesday. And another week, another glimpse at perfection here at Action Network. After Sean Kerner's 16-0 run, our very own Chris Raybon picked up the baton with a 7-0 record betting NFL Week 3. To give everyone a piece of the action, we're offering new Action Pro subscribers $20 off the price of an annual subscription. All you have to do is go to actionnetwork.com/pro and use the promo code PERFECT, and you'll get instant access. instant notifications anytime Chris Raybon makes a pick. You'll also get access to our projections for NFL spreads, totals, and props for every game every single week. Once again, that's actionnetwork.com/pro with the promo code PERFECT. Over to the hardwood, and let's set the stage for tonight's slate. First, at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, the New York Liberty look to hold serve in Game 2 against the Atlanta Dream. The Liberty won Game 1 by 14 points behind Breanna Stewart's double-double and continue to look the part as the #1 team in women's hoops, favored to win the title at plus 150. New York is favored by 12.5 tonight with a total of 156.5. As for the nightcap, the Las Vegas Aces also look to go up 2-0 against the Seattle Storm after an 11-point win in Game 1. It wasn't all easy for the Aces, who stormed back from down double digits to win and cover after Seattle was held to just 2 points in the fourth quarter. Unanimous MVP A'ja Wilson led all scorers with 21 points. In that bout, the Aces enter this postseason looking to three-peat and are 7.5-point favorites in Game 2 against the Storm. Total set at 159. So now we welcome in Maria Marino to the studio. Can't think of someone better to break down women's hoops in the playoffs to come. Maria, we're gonna take a scope out for a second before looking at tonight's game. Obviously, you know, the Liberty, the Aces, it seems pretty chalky. They're pretty heavy favorites here, but there's a team in particular that you think might be able to pull off an upset in the first round of the WNBA playoff series.
Wouldn't that be fun to have at least one of these 4 series go to a Game 3? And I think that most people, when looking at the playoff picture, thought, okay, the Fever have a chance here to make some noise against the Connecticut Sun. And Game 1 did not go the Fever's way at all, but I think that actually bodes well for them in Game 2. They shot horribly in Game 1, particularly Caitlin Clark, who was 2 of 13 from the three-point line. I don't think that's going to happen again. Now, as far as this spread, it's gotten tighter and tighter. It was, I believe, 7.5 open. I'm seeing 5.5 now, so I'm a little nervous about that. I haven't placed a bet on this game, but I do like the Fever to keep it close here. They've been one of the hottest teams post-Olympic break. We've been talking about it, and there is a trend I want to point out that Dan O'Mattia actually highlighted on our Buckets WNBA podcast. So in their last 5 playoff series, the Sun won and covered Game 1, 0-5 against the spread. In Game 2, by the way, they are very aware of that. Alyssa Thomas pointed this out in post-game last game. So they know that they've sort of taken a step back in Game 2 before, so that's something to be cognizant of. But I think the Fever and the firepower that they have, they were getting good looks. They just weren't converting. So if that continues, this could be a much more competitive game.
And obviously you mentioned the line moving 7.5 to 5.5. Sharp money, smart money coming in on the Fever, expecting similar to you. The shots were good. They just didn't fall. You can't imagine Caitlin Clark is going to be down bad forever with her shooting performances.
Yeah, and I would just add, too, that, you know, with this historic season that Caitlin Clark has had and all the hype and literally playing herself into an MVP conversation where she finished 4th in the MVP voting, I don't see her going out like on a dud. So I'm hoping for a good one.
Maybe a points over prop, too. We'll have to see on that one. But let's talk about tonight's game in particular. Dream Liberty, obviously I mentioned it at the top, 12.5-point favorites. The Liberty continuing to dazzle up top in the W, but you know, the spread has obviously, it seems a little bit high. Last game, Game 1, they were 13.5-point favorites. They ended up covering by a half a point. Got the hook. That line drops down a point here. How do you see this one coming out and playing out in Game 2?
So I've gone back and forth with this because it is a fairly high number. But I think the way to go is the Liberty side here. And I'm going to go ahead and take the Liberty minus 12.5. The Liberty were so inspired in Game 1, and I think a part of that was they played the Dream on the last game of the season. In fairness, the Liberty didn't have much to play for. Atlanta was playing for their playoff future. But the Liberty still did not like the lackluster effort that they had, and they made it a point to make a statement in Game 1. I think that continues. I don't want to overthink this here. The Liberty are the far superior team. The Dream, you could argue, just barely made it into the dance.
They did.
And like in post-game, even after game 1, they talked about how they watched that film from the last game of the regular season and they were just like disgusted and were like, we can't have that. And they don't want this to get anywhere near the opportunity to shift to Atlanta. I feel like adding Leone Phoebish into the starting lineup was a great move by Sandy Brondello. I don't know that they match up well. And you know what this reminds me of is last postseason, the Aces were the #1 seed, and they rolled in their first 2 games against the 8th seed. They covered both. So I'm going Liberty here. I'm going -12.5. It's a little nerve-wracking just because sometimes you see teams play down to opponents. But I do think, like I said, the Liberty they're on a mission here to show we are the best team and we're not going to let this other team push us around.
Right, and it makes sense. And you mentioned the lineup change, 21 points for Phoebish in the game 1. And it does feel like this is the time for the Liberty to take advantage to continue to stay hot, right? Like last season, they ended up coming up just short in the championship. I think that's kind of on their minds. We know, like, Stewie wants a championship brought to New York. So it's not like them to lit up on the gas pedal a little bit. It's got to be all systems go, continue to go down.
Ride that championship momentum. That's what I'm going for here.
That's what you're going for there. Another team looking to ride the championship momentum because they've had 2 championships in a row.
Yes.
The Vegas Aces. But this one I think is a little bit more interesting, right? Like we saw Asia Wilson, she's a superstar. She was great. But the Aces were down after 3 quarters.
Yeah.
It took a dominant 4th quarter to end up winning, covering, all of that in particular. I know you don't have a thought on I guess, what is your lean on the spread? And then I know you have a player prop for this matchup as well.
So I'm not betting this, but my lean is definitely Vegas here. I just don't see how you can feel comfortable trusting Seattle, and especially like the way that they lost game 1. So this was a disgusting 4th quarter by Seattle. Do you know how many points they scored? 2. Good job. Did your homework. But 2 points? Are you kidding me? I think they were 0 of 12 from the floor. Had 6 turnovers. It was bad. And look, the Aces defense is good, and they were also cooking. You know, sometimes when you get a lot of stops, it builds momentum on the other end, and they were just making contested shots and just feeling it. And it felt like Seattle just kind of rolled over. And like, do I expect them to do that a second game in a row? I sure as hell hope not, but I'm not gonna bet it. I am, however, going to take that motivation and use that for a prop here.
Yeah, so you mentioned it. Obviously, you have a prop. It's interesting, just in general, the Aces, 9.5 game 1 point favorites.
Yes.
That's down to 7.5. Seems like Asia Wilson also just 21 points. She's going to probably drop a 30 burger or a 40 soon.
And that's the other fear, because she had a bad first half.
Yep.
I think she was 1 of 8 from the floor in the first half. She had the MVP ceremony beforehand. Maybe there was like a little bit of emotion. Not totally sure, but it didn't matter because she still ended up, scoring
the game
21.
high 21.
Yeah, and she was just unstoppable in the second half.
As she always is. Yeah, but you mentioned you have a player prop on this side, and you're targeting the Seattle side. Possibly some motivation coming out from one of the players in particular.
Well, you know me. I love to bet motivation, good or bad.
That's how you have to do it.
So I'm targeting a player that sort of thrives on that, who always she takes things personally, which I love, and that's Skylar Diggins-Smith. So I'm going over 22.5 points and assists for her. She did hit this in 7 of her last 10 games, 4 out of 5 games against Vegas this season. I think she definitely looks at this matchup and thinks, this team, they have all these all-stars, all these Olympians. Well, I'm a superstar too, and I think that's really how she approaches that. She somehow scored 16, only went 5 of 15 from the floor in game 1. Also had 8 assists in 37 minutes. She's going to get the burn. This was, once again, with a 2-point 4th quarter for the Storm. If you score at least somewhat of like a normal scoring 4th quarter, I would think that she's going to have more opportunities to score and more opportunities to dish the ball. Like I said, this is a do or die game. Sky Dig, she has a lot of pride. She plays with a lot of tenacity, and it doesn't hurt that the ball is always in her hands. She has just full autonomy with this offense, deciding whether she wants to attack, whether she wants to feed her teammates. And so I think if the Storm are going to keep this somewhat competitive, it's going to be Skylar Diggins-Smith is going to have a good game. So that's what I'm taking here.
Yeah, I like this one. I think I'm going to tell you on this
What?
one here.
Oh,
yes,
no, don't
I
make
like
me
your
nervous.
I like your reasoning. I mean, listen, it makes sense, right? Like if if your season's on the line,
Yes.
you're going to do or die by your best players. And who's going to shoot the ball 15 to 20 times a game?
Yeah.
The better players.
Now, I would get on this. You might see it at 23.5 now, which I still like. It's a little bit of juice right now at 22.5, so.
Okay, well, I'll have to take a look after this is done, but I'm going to ride with you.
Take a look at her, look at Nneka Ogwumike, even Gabby Williams. I think those three key pieces are the ones that you want to target in this do or die situation.
Yeah, a concerted effort, hopefully, at the hands of the Seattle Storm with their season on the line against the Aces tonight. But Maria Marino, appreciate you coming on, and we'll see you again soon. Enjoy the W.
We need some luck tonight. Charlie. So let's get the good vibes.
Keep it going. And over to the Diamond, and let's take a look at how the National League wildcard race stands with just 6 games left to play. The red-hot New York Mets took 3 out of 4 from the Phillies this weekend and have leapfrogged the Arizona Diamondbacks for second spot by a half a game. New York starts that 3-game series in Atlanta tonight. Need to win 2 out of 3 for a playoff berth. Atlanta is on the outside looking in with 1.5 games behind the Diamondbacks, 2 games behind the Mets, as we welcome in Sean Zerillo to talk both the wild card races and then, of course, get a best bet from him before he goes. Sean, the Mets surprised me with the 3 out of 4 against Philadelphia. It seems like they're kind of safe now. The Atlanta series is a bit worrisome, but how do you see this playoff race kind of ending out, and how can you attack it from a betting point of view?
Yeah, I think at this point, the bet is either to bet on Atlanta to make the playoffs or Arizona to miss, considering it's between these 3 teams. The Mets and the Braves are playing head-to-head, but the Mets and Braves both own tiebreakers over the Diamondbacks as well. And I don't think that's being figured into the math quite enough here. So if you go by Pacoda projections, they really like the Diamondbacks. They have Arizona about 85% to make the playoffs, Atlanta closer to 40%. That would put Atlanta at plus 155 implied to make it. Arizona at about 570, minus 570 implied to make it. But looking at Fangraphs, the BATX and ATC projections, their average has Arizona closer to 72% and Atlanta closer to 50%. And I would side with Arizona to miss the playoffs, taking the juicier number at this point. Took plus 340 today. There were some books that were down closer to plus 240. I think plus 300 or better is a solid price point to jump into right now. But if you'd prefer to take Atlanta, if you think the Braves might sweep the Mets, that would be the direction you can go instead. Their average odds were around plus 105. You can get as high as plus 120 or even better than that on Atlanta right now. As I mentioned, the Braves and the Mets do have the tiebreaker over the Arizona Diamondbacks. I'm going to be looking for ways in the next few days to try to get those teams in and to get Arizona out. One reason, why I bet Arizona to miss and not Atlanta to make it today, I bet Atlanta on the money line straight up against the Mets. So I didn't want to over correlate my positions when the numbers are going to adjust. We're going to see how the math bounces around in the coming days. Even more important to take a look at that in the American League potentially than the National League, especially considering 2 of these 3 teams in the NL are playing each other. But yeah, Arizona to miss or Atlanta to make it, either one at plus money right now. And I just think the juicier number on Arizona to miss.
Right. Arizona has 2 games against San Francisco, a 3-game series against San Diego, which the Padres, if they're able to kind of push LA forward a bit, take 2 out of 3, maybe even sweep, then all of a sudden they have something to play for. And again, like you look ahead toward the matchups and stuff, you have Jordan Montgomery and Eduardo Rodriguez. I know 2 fade candidates that you've loved to fade in the second half, lining up in the last 2 games of the season when it might be on the line. And then vice versa, Atlanta has Kansas City, which the Royals, we'll get to them in just a second. Could they clinch a spot and then all of a sudden they're going to sit Reagans? They're not going to push him. Atlanta, they're going to go for it all. It's such an interesting way to break it down, but it does feel like if you think Atlanta is going to take 2 out of 3 from the Mets, then, trying to fade Arizona is the way to go. But as for the American League in general, too, we currently have a tie between the Tigers and the Royals for that second wild card spot. The Detroit Tigers, by the way, are in progress and leading the Tampa Bay Rays. They moved that game up based on weather. They're up that game 2 games to none. The Royals, though, they're in free fall, losing 7 straight. I mentioned at the top of the show, Detroit, basically given a 0% chance of making the playoffs 6 weeks ago. A 25-10 run since. Minnesota, meanwhile, has slipped after losing 4 of its last 5. They find themselves a game out of the wild card. Seattle is a half game behind Minnesota with 1 extra loss. This is such an interesting, I think this is the most fascinating race of all of them because it's not only is it 4 teams in general, but you have the free-falling Royals, the Tigers who can't seem to lose, the Twins who can't seem to get out of their own way, and then Seattle who's just there. How do you see this one kind of playing out, and where's the value lie here? I know, the odds are taken off the board because the Tigers are in play, but, if you had to just break this down, how do you do that?
Yeah, Seattle just sort of existed their way into continuance in this race somehow. I was frankly surprised to see that they were still mathematically alive as of a couple of days ago with how poorly their season has gone emotionally. But as of this morning, there was value on Kansas City and Seattle to make the playoffs, value on Detroit and Minnesota to miss. Among those 4 bets, Minnesota to miss seemed like the consensus best bet amongst them because the most optimistic projection only had Minnesota making the playoffs around -110 to -112. You could find as high as +128 on them to miss the playoffs. That seemed like the best bet among the 4. Obviously, the most fun bet is taking Seattle at +650, +700 to make the playoffs compared to an average projection of around +610. Detroit, as you mentioned, is in progress. They do have a lead. There is still one book out there if you search around that still has odds up. They took the odds down for Detroit, but they left them up for the Twins. They left them up for the Royals. And they left him up for the Twins, Royals, and the 4-team, the Seattle Mariners as well. So you can, potentially shop around. There might be books that didn't take props down for teams other than the Tigers. And if the Tigers are going to win today, it obviously decreases the chances for the other 3 teams. So take a look around the market. The reason I haven't jumped in yet on Minnesota, which I said was the best bet amongst the 4 potential options, they play the Marlins over the next 3 days. And I think they're likelier to add, wins to their record or add probability to their chances of making the playoffs relative to those other teams because Seattle is going to close against Oakland, Detroit going to close against the Chicago White Sox. Kansas City is going to close at Atlanta after facing the Washington Nationals. But I do think I would rather avoid that Marlins Twins series if possible. Give it a couple days, maybe even to the final day of that series if I like the spot for Miami. I'll take a shot against Minnesota to make the playoffs before they play the Orioles to close the season.
You know what's interesting, and I want to ask you a quick follow-up here with Seattle. Obviously they're +750 to make, plus 106 or 160 to 1 to win the World Series. Like, my thought goes to we had this conversation about the Giants on payoff pitch like about a month ago, where like if they make the postseason, is this team a team you want to face? Luis Castillo is coming back from his injury. Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Bryce Miller, Brian Wu, they have, one of the best starting rotations in all of baseball. Like, is it crazy to just take a home run swing, maybe throw a 1/10 of a unit down on Seattle and hope that, if they make the playoffs, you play into their upside?
Yeah, if you want to, if you actually think they have a realistic chance of doing so, and they have fewer games left, they need a lot of help. It's not just they have to win 4 or 5 or win out. They need some help on top of that. But yeah, if this team makes the postseason, especially in shorter series, they're going to be extremely dangerous because you just need a little bit of variance from your offense in those short series to win, on top of the fact that they just do not hit well at home. Nobody hits well in Seattle. Maybe going on the road, being a wild card team, would be to their benefit, having to play some road games, just getting out of Seattle with their offense. But they improved their roster, adding Randy Rosarino. Julio was hit much better in September than he did earlier in the year. And with that starting pitching depth, it forces you to move some of those arms to the bullpen. So it just makes your bullpen better too. You actually can do something with that pitching depth. Come October, it expands your bullpen and gives you a bridge guy between your starting pitcher if he struggles and the back end. So yeah, I think Seattle is very live if they do make the postseason, but their chances of getting there are sort of out of their hands at this point. It may come down to the White Sox potentially upsetting the Tigers in the final 3 games of the year.
Chicago has the opportunity to do the funniest thing. If they can, lose 120 games and then cost a division rival, the Detroit Tigers, a playoff berth. But, that will remain to be seen. You can obviously keep an eye over the next week. Plus, I think Seattle, if they're able to get in more than live to make a run, similar to kind of where we set up about the Giants a month ago. And obviously, their offense never ended up hitting. But I can't let you go without a best bet for tonight. I know one game's still close to your range. 7:07 first pitch between the Red Sox and the Blue Jays. Brian Bayo on the mound against Bowden Francis. How do you see this one playing out?
So this line certainly moved in my direction, but I still think there's enough meat on the bone to fire on Toronto. Bet both the first 5 inning and full game lines at -120 last night. Projected these closer to -152 and -145 respectively. Would bet them up to -140 and -133. Bowden Francis has been a much better pitcher in the second half than he was in the first half. Changed his pitch mix, put away his curveball, which was getting hammered. He started throwing his splitter this season, emphasized it much more in the second half, and he's also doubled his slider rate too. His strikeout minus walk rate has nearly doubled from 11.6% to just under 22%, I believe. And his expected FIP is down more than a half run, but the expected indicators, the pitch modeling metrics, his command, all trending in the right direction. So I think Bowden Francis is a guy I've continually bet on in the second half. The Jays defensively have a big hidden advantage in this series. They've been the top defensive team in baseball per defensive run saved for each of the past 2 years. They're 5th by outs above average this year. Boston closer to 9th, and I believe 24th by outs above average. So big defensive advantage for Toronto. 2 bad bullpens. Boston's offense, too, has really struggled in the second half over the past 30 days. Their bullpen has gotten fatigued, struggled in the second half, and other teams have caught up to their unique pitch mix this year. But also Boston's offense has kind of collapsed down the stretch. So give me the Blue Jays in both halves up to about -140 and -133.
Yeah, it really feels like Bowden Francis, the second half turnaround that he has been, something incredible and obviously something to keep on backing, while books seemingly not moving the market enough in favor of Bowden Francis. But Sean Zerillo, appreciate you hopping on. Best of luck tonight, and let's go Mets. Or I guess maybe not tonight for your bet, but in general.
Yeah, let's enjoy the final week of baseball. Hopefully the Mets do make it to the playoffs, but hopefully we get the Mets and the Braves in there for sake of all futures purposes.
Yes, please. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you for having me.
Just a reminder that any pick that you hear on the show, like the one Sean just gave out on Toronto, you can easily reference by following us in the award-winning Action Network app under the handle @green.daily. We keep track so you don't have to. And that's going to be all for me on this Tuesday. Thank you for watching. Tomorrow we'll be back again at 3 Eastern on the Action YouTube channel and the Action app. We're talking college football with Colin Wilson, Brett McMurphy, Mike Calabrese. It's going to be a great one. Enjoy the day away from football. Enjoy the postseason feel of baseball. And I'll see you again here tomorrow.